There are pedophiles who hunt single mothers. They'll use the mother to get to the children. And it's very obvious when you're on a dating profile. I'm the mom of 2 kids, right? And clearly you're on a dating website because you're single. And so that's all they need. And then they can surmise that one, you're looking for a relationship, which means that you're somewhat lonely, hence why you're on a dating website. And there's no other guy that's there to protect the children, right? So he just has to come in as a knight in shining armor and just be like, yeah, your kids are my kids. What do your kids need? I can't tell you how many stories of women, and this is why I say it's a multi-generational thing. For many of these women, they grew up in an environment where they had an insecure father figure. Either he wasn't there, in and out, whatever it might be, or he was abusive in some respect. And then they don't have a healthy male to female relationship dynamic example to measure men against.
Welcome to Family Dialogues podcast. And today we have the pleasure of speaking with Adam B. Coleman. He is the author of this amazing book, The Children We Left Behind. He is a New York Post contributor and also the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing and Wrong Speak Media. Today, I thought it was important to speak with Adam about his book, his experiences, and even solutions to some of the challenges we're going to be discussing today. For this podcast, we believe that the future is actually the nuclear family. Without a healthy society that has healthy nuclear family systems, it is very difficult for any culture or country or society to thrive and grow. And so with this conversation, we want to look at the negative effects of no longer prioritizing the nuclear family in the Western societies and why it's important that we need to course correct and think about the importance of it, especially as it relates to our children's development. So, Adam, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
When I read your book, oh my, I saw myself in your book. I am also a product of single parent family. My parents were married and they were divorced when I was 3, and I then went to live with my grandparents. So between 3 and 9, I had the experience of a nuclear family with them. And then I went back to live with my mother, who was still single when I went back. One of the things as I was reading your book is how vulnerable you were in expressing the challenges you were experiencing, even some of those still today, and how you see how adults make decisions regarding children. And I saw myself in that because so many of the struggles I had as a child and I'm still struggling with today stem from the fact that my parents' marriage did not work out and I had to navigate the world of especially understanding relationship with the opposite sex without a father guiding me. There's so many parents and individuals who are maybe not parents who are going to be listening to this conversation. What made you want to really share your experience with the rest of the world through this book? Because as I said, many of us are from single parents background, but we just quietly struggle with it, and like, okay, I don't want to cause any friction and bring up anything from the past, affect my parents. Let me just try to resolve it on my own. What made you say, no, I think it's an important message to share with the wider population?
So the first book I wrote was Black Victim and Black Victor. And people who may not be familiar with it, it was
Mm.
a way of, this was post George Floyd. And it was kind of answering the question of the moment, so to speak. What's the biggest issue facing Black Americans? And in my perspective, the biggest issue facing Black Americans is family separation. And towards the end of the book, I'm saying, actually, this is the biggest issue facing Americans in general. And also, dive into different cultural aspects throughout the book. But that's the biggest message. And I do talk a little bit about my childhood. Obviously, this book is very much so like a deep dive into my childhood. So from that point, when I wrote the book, and started getting opportunities to write publicly for different publications and stuff like that, I would talk about news, politics, and other cultural things. But the thing that kept popping up was like, I see a family dynamic in this news story that no one else is talking about. One of the ones that I wrote about was about the Uvalde shooter, the mass shooting that happened at the school in Uvalde, Texas. And He wasn't a kid. I think he was 19 or something like that. But they said, he was already having mental health issues and his father didn't live with him, but he would have some access to his father. But when the pandemic happened, that got severed. And they said from that point, his mental health dramatically declined. And then we know the rest of what happened. And so I use that as an opportunity to point out that connection that children have with both of their parents and boys especially need their fathers. Both children need their both parents for different reasons. Um, but for him, that was the linchpin for him to do something so heinous, and that's how important it is for kids, especially kids who are on the fringe like he was, to have that bond and that connection, because it will help to save his life and other people's lives as well. And I obviously talked about my upbringing and what I went through. And so it was just a pattern that kept coming up over and over and over where I'm talking about it and then I would tweet about it. And then when I would tweet about it, I would get such a heavy response. I think my first viral tweet was talking about not having my father as a kid. And that was emotional because one, I was relatively new to Twitter. And that was emotional because it went viral and it didn't go viral because I said something crazy, right? It went viral because I was very open about how I felt. And that's when you get all these messages like me too. Yeah, that's my situation. And all these people, most of them didn't look like me, right? That's the other thing. It's only the black kids who are suffering from family separation. I'm talking to kids. Some of them had both parents technically in the home, but they never saw their father. Their dad was working 60 hours a week, 80 hours a week, right? Traveling all the time. They never saw their father and they have the same issues that I did when I was a kid. And so I'm just seeing this over and over when I would talk about the family dynamic and the family separation, it's such a heavy response. I would write about it in the New York Post and I would get emails. Multiple times this happened. Emails from people from who worked in juvenile homes, juvenile detention homes. And they'll say 99% of these kids come from a broken family situation. This isn't coincidence. This is an abundant um and it's an abundance and an obvious connection as to why these kids are ending up in this situation. It's a very commonplace thing. So it's funny because it took me 4 years to write this, or yeah, 4 years to publish it at least. And it took me a long time to realize this is the book I should be writing, even though it's the thing I talk about the most. Everything is about timing. And it was the right time. And I have a whole story about even just coming to the point of writing this book and publishing it on my own and receiving a message, now is the time you have to do this. I don't know. We can get into that if you want, but that's what led for me to write about this. So I had already been very open about my childhood experience through doses of little tweets and articles here and there. I would tell a story here, a story there. But this was like putting it all together and having an opportunity. Because when you write an article, it's, 750 words or less, right? But with the book, you can dive into every little emotion that you had as a child and what you felt like and what you went through. And you can really get in depth in these stories and have people connect with it. So I was very motivated to write it. It took me 3.5 months to write it. And here we are talking about it.
Yes. As you were speaking about the response that you got on Twitter, it reminded me, I forgot the name of the YouTube handler, but I don't know if you know him. There's this man who has a YouTube page that the things my father didn't teach me or something like that. And
Mm,
he has a huge following. So he would do things like how to tie a tie, how to fix faucets, and just how to dress well as a man, and so on. And he also, similar to you, was quite surprised by the number of people who connected with the fact that here is something he's providing that they also missed as children. And what is
yeah.
fascinating to me is there are adults like yourself who are willing to say, hey, this is not correct. What is happening in society to our children? And also, the data is showing from cross cultural research from 40, 50 years of cross cultural research showing that single parent households is not the healthiest for children. It's actually nuclear family households. But yet, you would think when you try to express it in the media and so on, there's a pushback as if there's nothing wrong. There's so many people who grew up without their fathers and they're fine. That's the thing that I
Right.
keep hearing. I didn't have my father, but I'm fine. But are you really thriving though?
Right.
Is there a void that you're dealing with that you wish you could overcome? So it's really interesting that it is there in the data and also from your experience, but people still want to say, no, 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 that's not something to talk about. It's okay. There are lots of people who are successful, but you might be successful professionally, but what's your personal life like? What's your
Exactly.
life with your children like, or even with your spouse or partner? To get into the conversation, the first page of your book, because as I mentioned earlier, I also grew up in a single parent household for part of my childhood. And these were some questions that I had to pause and reflect on too. And I want to read some of them because for people who were raised in a healthy nuclear family, these are questions they really don't think about. And they probably don't even realize that these are questions that you were asking yourself. I was asking myself, and so many other people in single parent households. So, just a few. Why wasn't my father around to wipe away the tears that streamed down my face when I felt lost in the world and hated what I was becoming? What was wrong with me? Was it that I didn't deserve to have a father who would put in the effort to love me unconditionally? Why did every boy around me have a man to mimic except me? Why did he refuse to sacrifice his time to spend with me? Why does everyone keep making excuses for him? And that last question, too, I think is going to be the meat of the matter for a lot of the conversation going forward.
Yeah.
People make a lot of excuses for when a parent leaves a child's life. Mm, if you can share with us, in reflecting on your life and writing these questions, your struggle with answering them, what were you going through? Were you asking these questions at a very young age, or was it as you became a man that you reflected on your childhood and started to ask these questions?
I would say it's both. There are times, especially when I see it like in two ways. When kids are struggling, they either express it internally or externally. So
Mm.
either you're punching walls or you're punching your confidence internally. And so I was always an internal person, right? So internally, I was depressed. I was down on myself. I had low confidence. And I was always like a thinker. I was always thinking about stuff and sometimes overthinking about who I am, what I'm capable of doing. Um, and maybe some of those thoughts weren't my thoughts, and that's a whole spiritual thing. But it started when I was a kid asking these particular questions. And some of those questions are in reflection, even as like a young man, looking back at my childhood and trying to figure these things out. I think it's important for people to understand that if I can like summarize my relationship with my father
Please
quick.
go ahead.
So my father was 50 when I was born. My mother was 24. My father was always married, but he was married to somebody else. And so there is that situation. And he had two kids with my mother. My sister is 4 years older than me. So there was always that situation where he had another life somewhere. And we weren't ever like completely part of his life. And I was born in Detroit. He always lived in Detroit. And things started getting really bad where we were living at. And we left Detroit and moved to Virginia and started kind of bouncing around. But from that point, I think it was about the age of 6 when I moved from Detroit, I really didn't see him often. And when we were in Detroit, I would see him occasionally. My memory is a little bit fuzzy as far as like how frequent. My mother obviously would remember how often he would come by. But she's told me like he would come over once in a while and help with a thing or two, or she asked him to do something. But she even while writing this book, I was asking her questions, and she said that I was never close to him. If he was to come over and try to give me a hug, I would run away from him. And it's because we never developed that actual bond. I don't think a lot of men understand how important it is. Women have 9 months of developing a bond with their child because it's growing inside of them. But when that child is born, men are starting from 0, right? And so they have to build that bond. It's why they tell you to hold your child. You have to build that bond like the mother has built it already. And so I don't think that bond was ever built with my father and myself, even from when I was very small. Hence why my mother said that he would try to give me money so I would come over to him. Right. So there wasn't that bond that was built. And on top of that, we moved. We moved for safety reasons. It was becoming more dangerous in the neighborhood that we were living in. And so from that point, I rarely saw him. I think I went probably 3 or 4 years. I can't remember it completely offhand, but I went a number of years before I actually saw him again. And from that point, I would see him very frequently. Um, you know, once every other year or something like that. And the times that I did see him, he didn't come to us because he wanted to see us. We just happened to live in the Northeast, so we were either living in New York or we were in New Jersey, but he wanted to go to New York City to get fabrics. He was a tailor. So he would drive from Detroit and he would stay with us. But even as a kid, I was excited to see him, but quickly I realized he wasn't really there to see us. We were the hotel. Right? He got to see my mom and he got to stay there, and then throughout the day, he'd go into New York City and do his thing, but we never did anything. There weren't any activities or anything like that. The last time I saw him, I was 16. He did take me to the mall. He took me shopping. Um, and yeah, that was the last time I saw him. The last time I talked to him, because we went a number of years after I saw him without talking at all. Um, I called him when I was 21, shortly after my son was born. And I wanted to tell him he had a grandson, or another grandson, I should say. And I didn't make it that far because it sounded like I was bothering him, you know? And I'm like, it's your son, Adam. You should know it's your son. It's weird. It was a very weird dynamic. And so it was like a 2-minute call, got off the phone, and I told myself, I'm not going to try anymore. It's not my responsibility to try and develop a relationship with my father. It's my father's responsibility. And so I told myself that um, I would never not answer his call if he attempted to call me. But I'm not going to try. And he never called. And he passed away, I want to say it was 2018. And I only found out that he passed away because my mom happened to Google his name and found out he had died a few months prior.
Mm. Wow, that is so heavy, and so many adults and children can also relate to that experience of having. In Jamaica, we call it a visiting parent or visiting father.
Mm.
You're just visiting in and out. In Jamaica, where I'm originally from, we have a high rate of children being born out of wedlock. And also, majority of the children, about 80% of children in single parent households in Jamaica are actually headed by mothers. So the dynamics that you're describing, it's pretty common for a lot of children from Jamaica, and I'm assuming also children in general who are experiencing the single parent visiting transient kind of parent. I wanted to ask you, do you recall when you realized something was not right? I don't know this man. I don't know if I love this man. I don't know if I connect with him. Do you recall the earliest time you started to question what's going on?
Um, I'm trying to remember like the earliest. I always knew like something was off, especially like when he would come to visit. Um, because my mom would be like, "Your dad's coming tomorrow," you know? And I was a little bit excited to see him. Um, but then, like, when he would come through the door, I'd be like, "Hey," but it wasn't like a big hug, "Hey, hey, big man, I love you. I haven't seen you in a long time." It was none of that. It was just kind of semi-cordial and not trying to catch up with me or how are things going. We didn't have this big dinner. We got to sit down and laugh or anything like that. It never felt like a fatherly connection. So I always knew like something was he's obviously my biological father, but something was always off about our connection. So yeah, I always felt like that. But then it stuck out even more because, we moved around a lot and we were in suburban areas and rural areas. And, at one particular point, I was in a I was in a school where I was like one of four black kids in the entire school. And it seemed like every kid was in a two-parent house. Almost every kid, I would say. It felt like 95% of the kids had their father involved. I did little league. All the dads are involved. If they're not involved in the little league team, they're there in the stands watching. It's just nothing but families. And I that was like the strongest like visual representation, like I'm different. I'm not necessarily different because I'm black and the rest of the kids are white. I'm different because my mom's not here sometimes because she has to work to provide for two kids. And my dad's not here at all. I don't even know if he knows I play baseball. He probably doesn't. And my dad literally never was there. And that's the thing that stuck out, standing in the outfield, looking at the stands, and my father is nowhere to be found. And even still, my father was nowhere to be found to even know that I did something. I got a hit. I caught this ball. Like there was no one to share my life with in regards to another adult male, especially my father.
Did you have the courage to ask your mother or question, this is not right? Why isn't he around more? Why don't I have a family similar to my friends in school? And also, what did you go through emotionally? So you're more of an internal person. When you
Yeah.
realized that your life was so different from your peers, what were you going through? So maybe start with asking your mother and then maybe go into that a bit.
No, I never. And to be honest with you, the most honest conversation I had with my mother was stemming around writing this book and her reading it for the first time and watching her cry and allowing for an opportunity for me to say how I felt. And she actually told me things that she's never told me before. She felt regret for not uh, pushing for my father to be more involved. And I had to tell her, it's not your fault. My father's a grown man, right? You can't force my father to love me. Love isn't by force. Right, he has to want to do these things. So I've never held my mother responsible for my father's failures. I've never felt that way. Anyone who's out there in a similar situation, do not blame the other parent, as long as they're not obstructing. My mother never stopped my father from being involved. She wasn't arguing with him. "You can't talk to your kids." It wasn't that scenario. So as long as you're not obstructing, the other parent, do not take guilt for the other parent's failures for not wanting to be involved. But no, I never shared these things because I was always internal. And I think it's important for me to highlight that there is like a pre and post Adam. And that was before I went to the mental hospital and after I went to the mental hospital. Before I went to the mental hospital, as I mentioned before, we left Detroit. We went to Virginia. We were there for about a year or so. Then we moved to upstate New York and we were staying with another family member. We abruptly left because it was an unhealthy environment. We were homeless, and then we're staying with a stranger. And then we finally get our own place. So all of that happened in a very short time span. None of it involved my father. My father wasn't there. It was my mother trying to figure everything out. And we're bouncing around, relocating one place to another, all this insecurity. And by the time we made it to our apartment, I had a mental break. Um, and so my sister, she describes I was underneath the table, like screaming in a fetal position. I told my mother that I wanted to die, and my plan was to get underneath my bed and wait for my bed to fall on top of me. So it was a very like kid way of thinking about death. Like, but I didn't wanna actually die, I just didn't know how to express what I was feeling and what I was going through. And once again, I never blame my mother for this action because she was listening to the professionals, but they recommend having me admitted into a mental hospital, and I didn't know I was going to a mental hospital. My mother just took me to this building and left me with these people. And it took me a little bit to realize where I was and that I wasn't leaving anytime soon. And from that point, I just did whatever they told me to do. I just did it because I just wanted to go home at that point. I just wanted to leave. And so the way I describe it to people is, when you go to jail, you're sentenced and you know when you're leaving. But when you go to a mental hospital, you have no idea. It's up to someone. It's just an arbitrary move to decide you're going to leave on this day. Yeah, they seem fine. They can go home. So it could be a week. It could be 6 months. I have no idea. It's up to whoever is making the decision. And so I was subsequently there for 3 months as an 8-year-old who was already suffering from abandonment, now completely abandoned in this place. And my mother having to visit me and not being able to take home her little boy. And I'm thinking like, it's today the day I get to go home. And it's not the day. And having to wait and just wait my sentencing out. I was I was incarcerated. We don't necessarily call it that, but that's what it is. I'm incarcerated. Um, and after I came out, even my mother says I was different. I was quieter. I was more reserved and kept to myself, but I was still suffering. I just learned to hide how I felt, and I just didn't tell anybody. You could like it. Obviously, you can see the signs. I was less obvious, far less obvious about, expressing how I felt and especially telling people how I felt because the last time I told someone, I got locked up. So I was suffering in silence. So throw them in the mental health institutions is not always the solution to every mental health problem, especially for children.
It's heartbreaking to hear you share it and also to read it in the book. Such a young and vulnerable age of age 8. You internalized your sense of abandonment, and I want you to describe what that abandonment felt like for you, because parents sometimes think my child is quiet, they're well behaved, I have a good child, not
Mhm.
realizing that because of the family dynamics, you're really internalizing everything and you're really self imploding, but you're not the typical. The literature shows boys tend to externalize and girls tend to internalize, and we can go either way. But what was that sense of abandonment? And the reason I'm asking is I want listeners, especially people who are parents who are not in their children's lives, who are not fighting to be in their children's lives, what
Mhm.
that abandonment is, so they have an idea of what their children potentially might be struggling with.
I guess it depends on the age. So in hindsight, I can see how kids who are abandoned can sometimes people please, and then they put all of their validation externally. The easiest way to see it is, let's say they're teenagers and they get a girlfriend the first time. And as a parent, you're watching and you're like, this girl is something's off with this girl, right? Right. But you see your son cling on to that. And even when things are unhealthy, he's staying on to that because losing that is like losing himself. This girl sees me and she validates me and she likes me. And I'm putting my all into this person. So when she breaks up with me, I am nothing. I feel nothing. I feel empty. So it's like it's a constant replenishing and then emptying, and replenishing and emptying, all because the external world has changed. And the role of both parents is different, but especially, I'm just going to speak from a boy's perspective. The father is supposed to build up my confidence so that if my outside world changes, I don't change, right? If I'm facing hardship, that I can withstand whatever the hardship is and not just completely fall apart because something out there changed. And if a girl likes me, wonderful. If she no longer likes me, it's okay. Right? I'm still good. I'm still worthy. Um and I didn't have that. So I would end up in relationships that that weren't always the best. Um, and granted, not saying that I knew what I was doing 100% of the time or anything like that. But, kids break up, you're a teenager, you have your first girlfriend and stuff like that. But I remember my first heartbreak, I was in legit depressed for like 3 months. And I was about 16 at the time. I think I was 16. I was legit depressed for 3 months straight. And I just knew how to hide it for the most part. Probably more people saw it at school than at home. And plus my mom was working. You're a lot more independent at that age. So, they don't see you all the time. But I was suffering. I was suffering because I put everything into this and she just like ended it. And so if she doesn't want to be with me, then that means I'm nothing. I'm not worthy of anything. And then it just spirals into I'm not good. I'm ugly. I'm this, I'm that. Right. It just spirals into all these internal messages to validate like why this person left you. Because you never had that feeling secured in the first place. So it's much like today, I'm confident. I'm secure with myself. So when I say something that someone doesn't agree with and they call me an idiot, I don't consider that they're right, right? Because that doesn't shake me. It doesn't shake someone who's confident. You can call me stupid. You can call me names. Matter of fact, someone the other day was trying to insult me with my politics. And then they said, "Is it because you grew up without your father that you're this way?" And I just laughed at it because you can't hurt me with this. I literally wrote about it because I'm absolutely fine with the outcome, and it's not my fault my father wasn't in my life. So you can't trigger some sort of emotion. I've resolved all these things, and I'm completely secure with that. 20 years ago is a different story, right? 20 years ago, I would consider that. It would hurt me. I maybe go into a depression because I saw something like but it only affected me because I didn't resolve these things.
Yeah. And you said that a man is supposed to build his son up and make him feel confident and also teach him self-regulation, how to handle
Yes.
those big emotions. And so, as you mentioned that, I thought about how appealing gangs are to fatherless boys
Mhm.
because the gang leader is validating you. Yeah, you're tough, you're strong, and I'm here to protect you. I'm going to show you how to do things and so on. And they seek that because they're not getting it at home, even though this gang leader might just be a couple years older than them, it is something that they can latch on to have a sense of brotherhood, to have a sense of somebody older who loves me. And in those gangs, there's so many things, drugs, sex, exploitations, you name it, that
Mhm.
can really impact a boy who doesn't have that solid, unconditional love and guidance from their father. So until fathers realize their importance, the gang will always be there to fill the gap,
Yeah.
whether it's for boys or girls, right? And the data even shows for girls without a father, they're more likely to have sex for the first time at an earlier age. They're more likely
Mhm.
to start their menstruation at an earlier age. That is a evolutionary biological aspect.
Mhm.
They're more likely to have uh, earlier teenage pregnancies, higher STD rates, and same with boys. Boys are more likely to be in juvenile facilities, engage in alcohol, drugs, and other delinquent behaviors. And the most pressing thing is it's not even just in childhood because the data is also showing that if you're raised in a single parent household, even if you manage to pull yourself out through education, you will not earn as much as someone from a two-parent household. And the reason being is that one of the reasons is that fathers usually introduce their children to their social networks. So
Mm.
professionally, you kind of have an in, but if you are from a single parent household, you're literally starting from scratch. And that kind of network that would help you to also build your financial life is also not there. It's such a ripple effect of not, okay, I managed to get through childhood. It's like a long-term thing. And even as it relates to issues with marriage and relationships, people from
Yes.
single parent households are more likely to file for divorce, separation, and all of that because they did not have the example of how to resolve conflicts as adults. And conflicts doesn't mean that a relationship has ended. It is so many things that for us who were raised in single parent households that we have to really overcome. And one of the things that you just mentioned too is how you were able to mask everything. And I want us to talk about that because parents and family members and so on love to say, they're fine. Everything is okay with them. They're not acting out. They're getting great grades in school and so on. Talk about how children from single parent households become really good liars of hiding their emotions.
My belief is that most kids want to please their parents, assuming that the parents are relatively normal people, not chaotic or crazy or anything like that. Although some kids please their crazy parents, most kids want to please their parents. And so they know that this behavior upsets their parents, makes their parents anxious, worried, whatever it may be. And so, in a dynamic where the child needs help, they see needing help as a burden on their parents. And so they're just not going to say anything because they don't feel comfortable saying something to someone who, in their view, can't handle an additional burden to whatever's going on. So, we're bouncing around from place to place in and out of homelessness. My mother's working long hours trying to take care of us. I didn't feel comfortable coming to my mother and telling her the thoughts that I have in my head. Um, I but I can come to her about other things, right? The superficial stuff. We would go to this place and we would hang out and we would talk about certain things. So it's not like there was no relationship, obviously, with my mother. I love my mother. Uh, but did I feel comfortable adding on to these things towards my mother's life? No, I didn't. And if I'm being transparent, in the first book, Black Victim, Black Victor, I have a questions introduction as well. And one of the questions was, why did I feel like a burden to my mother? And that really upset my mother. She said, you put that there. You were never a burden. And I said, Mom, I said, why did I feel? I didn't say, why was I? I said, why did I feel like I was a burden? And that's how I felt. And I'm just being honest. I felt that way, not because you did something, but that's what I was going through. And I felt like a burden if I was to tell my mom, hey, I'm really suffering because my girlfriend broke up with me and I don't know how to handle this. No one knew. I didn't talk to anybody about that. I don't even think I talked to friends about how I was really feeling with my first breakup. And that's a normal thing that kids go through. But I didn't have anyone to talk to, no one to relate to. And yeah, so kids easily mask things. I did that a lot. I did that in my young adult years too, just mask things and just hid stuff until my life was falling apart in different ways, and I had to go get help. Uh, and I thought I was going for one thing, and then, wait, I have like this entire backyard of mess that I have not addressed ever that just starts coming out. And for the first time, I'm expressing myself in these feelings, and I'm crying session after session after session for probably like a month or two because I just never talked about it. I just act like it didn't bother me and it wasn't there, but obviously it was there. As someone says, your body keeps the score. And I'm showing it in different ways. I just think people can't see it, but obviously people can see it. And now it's affecting my life and I have to do something about it. And if I can just add, sometimes there's a problem, but you have a comparison to really demonstrate like, how different this thing is or how important something is. And so having my son at a relatively young age, at the age of 21, it forced me to grow up and figure things out rather than just kind of relish in whatever I was going through. And it's not to say that I didn't struggle, but my son was a purpose and a motivation for me. One, to not be my father, but two, also to remedy certain things. And with him, I said, when I was a kid, I didn't like this. So with him, I'm going to try and do better with this particular thing. So all the things I talk about with confidence and things like that, yes, I'm speaking from a child's perspective, But now I see it from a father's perspective, and I see all the things that my father didn't give me, I give to my son. I see my son is way ahead of me emotionally, maturity-wise, vision, all these different things that I didn't have. I was lost. I was like, "I guess I'll do this. I don't know." Like, I was always unsure about myself because I didn't have anyone to kinda back me up to say, "It's okay. Like, you got this." I used the first breakup as an example. When he had his first little girlfriend, right? I was just like, "Okay." In my head, I'm like, "This is not gonna last." Like, it's fine. Let him go through it. And when the time came, I was like, "So how's" and like, "She broke up with me." And I was like, "It's alright, man." And I got to talk to him and tell him my story. So he didn't feel like he's alone. Like there's something wrong with him and no other kid goes through a breakup. Like, "Hey man, it's perfectly normal. Let me tell you what I went through." "Oh, wow, you went through the same thing." And that is something that I learned as a kid that was incredibly important because I always felt like any problem that I went through, I'm the only one who's going through that problem. And that's why it's important why to write this book and to speak out because a lot of these kids think they're the only ones going through it. They think that they're the outlier. They think that they're abnormal, that something is wrong with them, or how they're responding to something is completely different than everyone. I was like, no, a lot of people are going through that. You're not the only one that's suffering from that, or even that suffering that you're going through is what everyone goes through. And it's perfectly fine and it's okay. Now get back up and go back out there, just like most people should be doing and most people are doing. So, it's that watching it in real time with my son, where for myself, it would have just kept me down. For him, he was like, okay, all right. And he was able to, I watched him, he was just able to kind of keep it going. And now that he's 20, because I made sure that we established communication. Even if he didn't feel comfortable, I always told him, "You can talk to me. You can talk to me about anything, right? And if you mess up, just tell me because it's better if you tell me so we can resolve whatever it is than you try to hide it. Don't hide anything with me. I'll always tell you the truth. I'll always be honest with you." And now that he is 20, he comes to me when he wants to tell me something and ask for my opinion. He's not scared tell me these things. Most kids are scared to disappoint their parents, but I try to reinforce to him like, man, we all mess up. We all make mistakes. So I try to demonstrate what I didn't have.
It's like you're one of the people on his council that
Yeah.
he can always go to. Similar to you, I didn't want to stress my mom. She was already overwhelmed with trying to provide for us and making sure everything with my education was okay. And I
Yeah.
I can relate that there was a sense of loneliness, and I was an only child too, so I didn't have siblings to really talk to about anything or heavy things that were going on with me. And I literally just buried myself into Nancy Drews and all kind of different books just to
Mhm.
dissociate. I mean, back then the internet didn't even exist, so I think maybe even now for a lot of children who are experiencing what we went through, the dissociation might then gravitate towards like social media and so on as a way to kind of calm and soothe them.
Right.
But I'm happy you shared it because parents need to know, not because you're not seeing the externalizing of the screams and the shouts and the fights and failing in school, it doesn't mean something is not going on. And as a child, you want to fill that void somehow. And if it means just being quiet and just
Mhm.
going under the shadows, then that works for you as a form of survival. So we have talked about the children, and I want to shift to the adults because you
Yes.
passionately wrote in your book about losing extended family. And as you wrote about that, I thought to myself, extended family on my mom's side, tight. I don't have a relationship. There's a whole family that I don't have a relationship with that could have been some sort of support for me and so on. Talk about the loss of not just a father, but the loss of two additional grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins that children in single parent households experience.
Yeah, in my situation, we were talking about before, my father is from Trinidad. Um, and it's weird for me because while it's easy to say like, "Oh, Adam, you're half Trini," but for me, it's a thing on a piece of paper. There's no emotion attached to it because I never had the opportunity to experience that culture. I never really, my father, from what I remember, my father would once in a while go back to Trinidad. He never took me. He never engaged with me about Trinidad. I had very superficial experience with it, having like a roti. It's just like a very small thing. I met some of my cousins and my grandmother one time, and it was at the same time. And she knew who we were, and they knew who we were. And this goes back to, I know we're not necessarily talking about, but this goes back to like the family secrets. It's like these open family secrets. It wasn't like, hey, you exist. It's like they knew who we were. And I got to sit down and talk to my grandmother for the first time. And it was a very superficial conversation. It wasn't very long. We weren't there very long. Even looking back, it was a little bit weird. I mean, it would be because you're meeting family members for the first time, but you may never see them ever again, and that's exactly what happened. I don't even remember their names. Um, I just remember, like, going to someone's house and talking to my grandmother one time. So it's a very odd situation to have that separation from one side of your family, and that's why I say my father was a biological stranger. I didn't know anything about him. I didn't even know his real first name for quite some time. I always got it mixed up. And so I didn't know anything about him. And because I didn't know anything about him, I didn't know anything about my family from that side. Even to this day, many of these things are kind of a mystery. I can't remember if I put it in the book or not, but I found out that I have a sister out there somewhere. I didn't know that until I started asking my mom questions. And she's like, yeah, you have a sister out there, but he had no relationship with her. So there's a woman that's out there, with no father, probably going through something similar to what you and I went through. And so it's just crazy the amount of open secrets that exist within families. I don't know if you want to talk more about that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I want us to go there. Parents and adults in families need to understand the psychological consequences on children when they have these open secrets.
Mhm.
You know, share with parents and people who are listening who might be the aunties and the uncles what that does to a child.
What it does, it leaves them incredibly vulnerable and it sends a message that they're not important because, and I have a chapter specifically called socially comfortable terrible parents. And it's because we know, and it'd be a different story if no one knew, right? I'd have a little bit more grace. But you know that your brother has abandoned their kids, right? But they still get to come over and hang out. You drink beer, high five them, laugh it up with them. And you know that they're not seeing their kid. You know they're not being involved in their life. And the excuses that they give you, you ate it up. And it's like, but there's no excuse. Oh, they're making it difficult for me. Well, life is difficult. Fight for your kid. Oh, well, like they just make poor excuses. And that's just enough to disarm everyone else and just say, well, look, he tried. So, hey, we're hanging out tonight, right? They just want to move on. They don't want to hinder the relationship that they have with that person. They want to see that person. If that's my brother, I want to see him as my brother in the best of light, but I don't want to see him as a deadbeat dad, right? And I don't want to. That's his business. That's the American phrase. No, that's their business. That's not for me to say. That's their business. I don't want to interfere. And the reason we don't want to interfere is because we don't want to hinder our relationship from adult to adult. But who cares about the relationship between the adult and the child?
Sure.
No one is advocating for them. So we say less. There's no social ramification or very little social ramifications for being a bad parent. Very little. Um,
Yes, you can be, for example, you can, as you mentioned in the book, if you are a drug addict, if you are a gang member or something like that, you can be ostracized But if you abandon your child, well, it's not our business, right?
Not our business. It's not our business as to what happened. Things are complicated and they just want to move on from there. No one wants to take them to the side like, man, listen, I love you, but what you're doing is wrong.
I'm gonna pick up my niece and nephew, and they're coming to
Right.
the family thing. Even that, to say, okay, he's not involved in my niece and nephew's life, but I want to make sure they're our family member, they're our blood. Let's rope them in, bring them into the family barbecues or just visit them and see how they're doing, just in general.
Yeah,
The extended family usually don't take that initiative. As you said, it's his business, so I don't want to step on it. Instead of saying, no, this is a child. This child needs to know their background, their family heritage and value systems and all of that. So even just accepting that the person is a deadbeat, we focus a lot on fathers, but you do have occasionally mothers who are like that too.
yeah,
It's also the other adults who are not taking the initiative to at least create some form of communication, some form of contact with that other child.
exactly. Yeah. They leave it be. Whatever it takes to preserve that relationship, they don't say anything. And not everything, a lot of people reflexes say, like, "Oh, call child protective services." Not everything that a parent does is something that you can report. Like I talk about, and most people don't talk about this stuff because we've normalized it. But I talk about how important it is as to how you speak to your child. Nevertheless, speak of your child. I have an issue when parents talk of their children like dirt, and it's like, well, you're raising them, so they're the byproduct of you're raising them. But how they speak to their children, and I wrote about a circumstance where she is yelling at a kid who I would guess is somewhere between the age of 2 and 3, and he can barely walk as she is yanking his arm, and she's saying, "You always do this." And I just thought to myself, that frustration and anger is misplaced. That frustration and anger sounds like to me, don't know who these people were because I was just walking down the street. But that sounds like something she wants to say to his father. Because she thought she was going to be in a different circumstance than to raise this little boy by herself and took it out on that little kid. It's that type of stuff. And I wish it was just like, oh, that was just a one off. We've all seen this to some extent where they speak to their children like they're dirt, like they hate them. And I don't care what people say, I watch what they do. You can tell me you love your kid. I'll do anything for my kid, but you won't sacrifice for your kid. You talk to them like they're trash. You treat them terribly. You think about them last, not first. You make decisions that don't benefit your children, but benefit you. I'm watching your behavior. But your words don't match up with your behavior. Your words don't match up with actual love and care for your kids. I don't know how many times I've heard, maybe it's on TV or something, or even in person, where you hear stories and people just say it nonchalant because that's how normal it's become. They broke up, got a divorce from the spouse, and they move across the country with the kids. And I'm just like, well, what about the dad? Now, they didn't say the dad was abusive, a drug addict, or anything like that. They just broke up. And I needed help. So I went to the other side of the country to get help from their aunt, cousin, or something like that. Not temporarily, they just stayed there. And so now the dad doesn't have an opportunity to keep that bond with the kids. It's already hard enough for divorce to happen in the first place. But it's even tougher when the parent is making the decision to just go elsewhere because it's supposedly easier to do so somewhere else. Not keeping him in mind, but especially not keeping the children in mind. It's not to benefit her to stay next to where the husband or the ex is. It's to benefit the kids. So he has access to the children so they can continue a relationship and do the best that they can in an unfortunate circumstance. But you see a lot of this stuff where the parents are clearly thinking about themselves. I say all the time, our culture allows for adults to act like children, but they expect the children to respond like adults. The adults get to be whimsical, chase love, run across the country, make wild decisions all the time. The kids are just dragged along and they expect them to champion the parent. And and I'm just like, that's not how this is supposed to operate. You're supposed to sacrifice for your kids. As a parent, that's your main job is to sacrifice for your children. And and those sacrifices are supposed to match up with the interest of your child, not the interest of you. And we have it backwards in many cases. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not just an obvious, like, oh, this is a person we call CPS on, and oh, they're a drug addict. Those things are obvious. Most people would point those things out. That's bad. But they can't see it in their own home. They can't see it within their own family. These bits and pieces of irreverent behavior towards their kids, this constant choosing the adult over the children. It happens in small bits and pieces. And there are no perfect parents. I'm not a perfect parent. So this is not me saying I know everything and I'm doing everything right. And there were times in my life where I was about to make some bad decisions that were for me, and I didn't have my son in mind. But my son said the thing that would have validated me because my son doesn't want me to not be happy, right? Because the kids, once again, want to please their parents. And so I'm glad I didn't make those decisions because it would have changed my son's life. And I'm glad circumstances changed. But I think about that stuff as to how quickly I could have done that, and everyone around me would have been like, bravo. But I do remember one person who kind of, this was online, when I told them what I was planning on doing, they side eyed me through text. And that was uncomfortable for me to experience because everyone else was just like, yeah, man, go for it. And I think about that now. I'm thankful that there was at least somebody out there who was like, yeah, I don't know if that's a good idea because everyone was just validating me. And I wasn't trying to be a bad parent, but I was acting like a bad parent.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned in your book is that children were never asked to be here and they are
Yes.
under our care until they're adults. So they're kind of stuck. And you are making, as you say, these whimsical decisions. For example, there's no form of abuse in the marriage or anything that would require a safety, some kind of safety net to be triggered to remove the child or the other parent from the home or anything like that. It's just that I'm no longer happy. We're no longer in love and all of that. And I deserve to be happy. I
Yes.
deserve to have the best. Children are resilient. They'll bounce back. I got divorced and my children are fine. But similar to you, I've read stories from people who were children of divorce. And similar to what you said, they become really good liars of hiding their true feelings because they've already lost a parent and they don't want to lose another one. And they are angry about why the adults could not work it out. What was so bad that they couldn't work it out? And I think in this conversation and even after this conversation, I really want parents to reflect. Yes, you might not be having the best marriage right now, but there are actions that can be taken to help you to resolve those issues because you're willing to sacrifice your child's safety, well being, and everything because you're not happy.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, there are seasons that you go through stuff. If you're married, you go through moments and you go through certain seasons where things aren't going 100% like you expected and things like that. And this is why people have to understand this isn't a new phenomenon. It's just new that we're talking about it.
And it's
Th-
increasing too.
it's increasing. In many ways, we are staring down 2 to 3 generations of this issue. I can point out a couple of generations, 3 generations. excuse me, 3 generations within my own family, right? So this isn't a new phenomenon. It's just that more and more people are willing to talk about it. We have social media where people can turn on, they have a platform immediately where they can express what they're going through. I have Twitter where I can talk about being abandoned as a kid. I can self-publish and express these things where we didn't have that 20 years ago. So a lot has changed, the access to information, but also access to testimony. So whereas for a mental health professional, right, because people are coming to you, but it's in private, it's in secret, people resolving things. But you know that there's an emergency happening and no one's talking about it. Now we're in an era where more people are willing to talk about these things. And by talking about it, more and more people realize they're not alone and that it is a problem. Right? So, we rely off of mass media to signify if there's some sort of emergency, right? If we didn't have mainstream media, would we have known that COVID was going around and it's bad and we should respond this way? Of course not, right? We would just been like, "My neighbor got sick." We wouldn't know. But we don't have the same level of emergency when it comes to massive cultural issues like this. Um, and I think part of the reason why is because there is no law that you can write. There's no drug you can take, right? There is no quick fix to this.
Mm.
This is going to be generations of work and reversal of lessons that we learned from our parents. And the first step to changing any of this stuff is to recognize that there is a problem. And we're now just starting to recognize that there is a problem. So,
And
yeah.
yeah, and you said we're now recognizing that there's a problem, but there's also a pushback with, for example, you don't understand. The man was an a-hole and it's difficult to interact with him, and I don't want my children to be around him. And sometimes, even when I do my parent coaching to let the parent understand that
Mhm.
you might not have had a good relationship with him, but that doesn't mean he's a horrible father. That doesn't mean that he doesn't want to have an interaction with his children. So don't base your decision on the fact that you have something horrible with him. He could really have a good relationship with his children if allowed to have that relationship in the way that is able to develop for them organically. But I think a lot of times the custodial parents will say the other parent was just completely terrible. You don't understand. They don't deserve to be in the child's life even though the parent wasn't abusive. So if there's a safety issue, that's something that needs to be addressed with interventions and so on. And, after that, maybe a gradual reintegration into the child's life. But if there's nothing like that, I think we really have to reflect. And I think the problem with culture is that back in the day as I'm reflecting on this conversation, preparing for this conversation, I used to think younger that older generation, the insistence of marriage before children and the father or men in the family meeting the man before you commit, that's kind of old fashioned. And looking at the chaos that we have created now, they were right. Not everything that is progressive is good. Because some of the things that I think can be resolved starts before the child even show up, where you might like somebody, you might like the man and you think he's amazing and all of that. But because you're so in love and the oxytocins are just filled in your body, you're not seeing it. It takes an uncle, a father, or something to say, hey, you want to leave that one alone. Right?
Right.
So it's even to change the whole culture of dating and courting and all of that to kind of stop some of the issues that we're currently facing.
No, you're 1,000% right. The way that we approach I'll speak I know you're in Germany, but I'll speak from, like, an American perspective. The way that we approach courtship and dating in the United States is very much so independent. You found this random person, you made the decision, you got together with them, you decided to marry them, you decided to have kids with them. It's only what you are doing, and like you said, you're making all these important decisions by yourself as you're emotionally attaching to this person. The red flags turn to green flags. You just ignore all that stuff because you're in love at the moment. right? You're being emotional, and you don't have someone who's on the outside who can be like, "Hey, man, I don't think that's normal what they're doing. Are you sure you wanna do that?" People you actually care and respect to kinda say to have you just at least think about it. Maybe they're wrong, but to at least have you think about it like, "Huh, yeah, I did you know what, that was kind of
Mhm.
weird, but I kinda just smoothed it over and kept it going." I think it's really important to have that, and I think that's why so many people end up in absolutely horrible situations these days. They're online dating. There's something called social proofing, right? And that's essentially what you're talking about. Most people would meet people that they were somewhat familiar with, or if they didn't know them that well, they knew people who knew them, right? So there's a social proof. So you can go to your neighbor or your classmate, like, hey, that guy, I really like him. Oh, yeah, I know his family. They're good people. You would get things like that. Or no, stay away from them. They're a bunch of drug addicts and it's crazy over there. All right, I'm staying away from them. You would have some sort of social proofing when it comes to that. Even when it comes to dating, we hear a lot of people talk about ghosting. Well, you only ghost if there's no repercussions to it,
Yeah.
right? But you wouldn't ghost your long-term family friend's daughter because you would have ramifications because the dad would come and say something to you or the mom would say something to you, right? There's ramifications for it. So you if you're going to break up with them, you got to do it a particular way. You can't ghost them. 'Cause there's ramifications for it. Well, now everyone's just dating people 40 minutes away and all over the world and even in other countries. There's no social proofing. They have there's no mechanism for them to know if this person's a scammer. I don't even know if you're using your real name. I have no idea. So we're we're essentially playing guessing games when it comes to love, and in the midst of that, we're all having sex and making children. And then we're shocked when, hey, we're in a very serious situation and this person doesn't even want the same thing I want moving forward. But these are questions you're supposed to have prior. Even for me, I just got married 4 years ago. And I was like, we talk all the time. We're good. My cousin is a pastor. He was like, well, if you want me to marry you, we got to do premarital counseling. I was like, okay. And we did it. And he asked us some questions. And I was like, yeah, of course. And she was like, no. And I was like, I guess we never talked about that. And we had discussions, and these were important discussions to have. But even in that scenario, we needed a third party to kind of realign us because we just kind of assumed stuff. And these were very important things. And we talk all the time. So I think it's incredibly important to have a group of people who are around you to help guide you in making sure that you're one of good conduct and you're continuing that trajectory of good conduct. And two, question your decisions. People need to lose their ego. I don't know everything. I may make mistakes, and I've had people check me or make me consider things or make me think about it. Am I doing the right thing? And sometimes they're right. I wasn't doing the right thing, whatever it might be. But we have to lose our ego because we can't always see clearly when we're in the midst of things. And sometimes it's the person who's in the tower overlooking the entire thing, and like, no, this ain't right. And I've had many a conversations with my wife when we're talking about cultural things, even talking about the importance of fathers and families. She just grew up in an environment where that wasn't emphasized. And it was normal that the father wasn't there. And I'm describing to her how detrimental it is. And she's watching my relationship with my son, and she sees how my son is watching me. And she's like, "Oh, man, it's really important." And then has her thinking about those feelings that she has because her father wasn't in her life. And all those feelings that she had that she suppressed and rational. Well, no one else has their father, so it's normal. It's okay. Those feelings I have deep down inside, I'm not to address. So we're all hurting and we're all trying to just smooth things over and pretend that everything is okay and how we're approaching stuff is fine. But clearly, it's not working. It's just not
Yeah,
working.
again, the Christian conservative thing of courting instead of dating. Sometimes I think, oh my God, I'm sounding like my grandparents, but it
Mhm,
is so, so important because, as you said, we're being trivial in dating people, and oopsies, there's a pregnancy.
mhm,
Oopsies, I didn't really like you, so the relationship is now gone. And the consequence of that for the child is so profound, not just with not having the parent, but you really described in your book on the chapter of a monster in your house. So you oopsie, you break up. The most dangerous place for a child to be is a home with a step parent, a person who is not their biological parent. And I want you to explain to parents, I don't know if you will want to share one of the examples that you use of
Yeah.
why it's so critical. It might seem old fashioned, conservative, Christian, whatever it is, to vet our partners well, have people around us, and marriage is not necessarily foolproof, but it's some kind of foolproof way of getting rid of the people who don't mean you well so that when you have a child, they have the best possible option of having two parents in the household. Because when one of those biological parents leave, you open your child up to monsters who are just lurking and waiting. Can you just talk about that a bit?
Yeah, 100%. I'm just going to be very straightforward when I say this. There are pedophiles who hunt single mothers. They'll use the mother to get to the children. And it's very obvious when you're on a dating profile. I'm the mom of two kids, right? And clearly you're on a dating website because you're single. And so that's all they need. And they can surmise that one, you're looking for a relationship, which means that you're somewhat lonely. Hence why you're on a dating website. And there's no other guy that's there to protect the children, right? So he just has to come in as a knight in shining armor and just be like, "Yeah, your kids are my kid. What do your kids need?" I can't tell you how many stories of women, and this is why I say it's a multi-generational thing. For many of these women, they grew up in an environment where they had an insecure father figure. Either he wasn't there, in and out, or whatever it might be, or he was abusive in some respect. And then they don't have a healthy male to female relationship dynamic example to measure men against. So when that guy comes in, splashing her with love, "You're so beautiful. Oh, you're so amazing. You have kids? What do they want? Here's $100. Tell them to get whatever they want." Like doing
Or
all of that.
babysit them, or
Let
babysit
me
them.
listen. You're stressed out. Go to the spot. Take care of yourself. I'll watch the kids, even though he's known her for 2 months. Right? They do too much because they're desperate to get towards those kids. And for that woman who may be desperate in that situation, whether it's desperate for love, desperate for help, or whatever it may be, being a single parent is stressful because you're the only one. There's no backup. Someone who says, "Hey, you're shouldering that load. Let me carry it for a while," feels amazing. And I can completely understand that. But they are using that. That's the vulnerability. They're using that to get closer to the children, to groom the kids. And many of these guys will wait a year. They'll wait a long time. They'll become your boyfriend, not doing anything. They'll get close, not doing anything. They'll become your husband, and then all of a sudden, weird things are happening. And the weird things that you might see, you excuse, right? You're like, "Huh, where were you? I woke up in the middle of the night, you weren't there. Where were you?" "Oh, yeah, I just went for a walk." And they just brush it off. They see their kids acting differently. Like, they were good at school, now they're terrible at school. What's going on? The kids don't wanna say anything because if you say something, Imma hurt you. If you say something, you're gonna hurt your mother. Or, "This is normal, it's okay." But the kids know that this doesn't feel right, right? They're being victimized by these monsters. And so these guys are purposefully manipulative, are purposefully tricking you, and they're using all of your weaknesses, all of your vulnerabilities, your insecurities, your need for connection with someone, which is a natural need. So this is not to wag my finger at single mothers who want to have a relationship with someone. That's a natural thing for someone to want. What it is to say is you have to be extremely mindful of the type of people that you bring in and not to operate off of desperation. You need to know what love bombing looks like. You need to understand. Sometimes too nice is a warning sign. And so you need to be very mindful of these things when it comes to any sort of access to your children in the long term. And some mothers think we went 3 months, 6 months, he never had access to the kids. Everything is good. I'm telling you, while that's much better than I moved him in 3 weeks later. And I've seen those stories. And you're like, you're insane. While that's much better, you have to understand that these guys are in it for the long run. They will wait until they have access to your kids. They'll use you so they can get to your children. It's sickening to think about, but there's so many examples of this happening. When I was having this very exact conversation, this was years ago, I was doing a podcast and it was three guys who were on this podcast. And after I finished saying all this, one guy said to me, what you just described was my childhood. I was molested by my stepfather. And that's exactly what happened to me and what was going on in the house. We just don't know these stories because people don't talk about them unless someone brings it up and they're like, "Hey, me too." We talk about the Me Too movement. There's a Me Too movement with kids who have been victimized by these men. The example I use in the book is actually from the Steve Wilkos show. It's a talk show, but it's a show with real people, and they're giving lie detector tests and things of that nature. And this girl, the mother, was constantly choosing the boyfriend over the daughter. When she was saying that she was being violated, she chose the boyfriend over the father. And there are so many cases of that happening. And even though she proved, yes, I was being molested and being raped by him, the mother wasn't distraught that she was wrong or anything like that. She said, well, blah, 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 blah. She was still defensive. And if I remember correctly, the mother took a lie detector test and she failed with knowing that this was going on at the time. So, as heinous as it sounds, there are women who are so low on themselves that they'll stay with a monster who gives them just enough attention and they'll sacrifice their children to make it happen. And this is why having extended family around us, having friends and family around us is incredibly important. To see these things, to say, "Hey, this is going on." So many examples of kids not feeling comfortable within their own home, saying something to their mother because their mother dismisses them. I've seen cases where the teenage girls are being touched, groped, raped by the mom's boyfriend, and the mother says, "It's because you dress this way," and they see their daughters as competition. And then they kick the daughters out. They see them as an adult equal when they're children, and here's this predator who's preying on them. Well, those kids often go to the aunts and uncles, the grandparents, right, to finally say something to them. Then things change in their life. Then they can get protected. But that's why it's important to have extended family. So if you see something that's off, this kid is withdrawn. If you see that this kid is always dirty, they're always hungry when they come over. These are warning signs, right? And it's not for you to dismiss it, it's for you to get close to it, it's for you to address it. So, you know,
You said
yeah.
you meant that those were some of the things that you said, a pedophile that was interviewed, he mentioned some of those. Can you mention the other ones that he said that he looks for when he's about to target a child, especially if that child doesn't have a relationship with their father who is no longer in the household?
Yeah, this was, I can't remember his name
Mm,
offhand, but he was being interviewed by a local media outlet. He was a
mm,
convicted pedophile, and he was being, as disturbing as it was, he was being very blunt as to what he was looking for when he was going
mm.
after children. And he said, if I saw that the kid had a father that was involved in his life, I would step away. He wouldn't even try. And I think that is so significant as to how important even just the image that the father is there, nevertheless, the amount of involvement that the father is there. But if he knew that there was a father that was involved in the kid's life, he would step away. But he would always lean towards the kid who was the last one picked, the kid who was struggling with schoolwork, the kid who needed help, the kid who had to wait a while for his mom to come and pick him up because she's a single mother. Right? He would always interject, "Hey, do you want me to I could take him home for you. Oh, thank you so much. That really helped me out. He would always interject in different ways. And this is absent of having like a romantic relationship. He's just trying to be a nice guy. He's a man in the community. And over, he would gain access to children and do sexual things to these kids. And most kids won't say anything because they don't know how to interpret how they feel about these things because they're being convinced that actually this is normal or they're being threatened, whatever it may be. And they don't have the conversation with their parents beforehand. If this thing happens, come and tell me. I don't care. So they feel ashamed, scared, whatever it may be. But yeah, that particular guy, that pedophile, was specifically looking for children in certain situations. Because once again, if you think of it from a hunter, that's why I say they hunt single mothers. If you're hunting deer, you go where the deer live, right? You know what they eat. You use sense that you know the deers are attracted to. You do all the things so that you can shoot the deer and you can capture it. And that's what they're doing.
And which is why also, if you happen to be separated from the father and the father is being very upset about this man that you're now dating, don't think about it as he's just jealous because I'm no longer with him. This is a father that might be sensing something is off with this man, and it's innate. There's an innate drive for men to protect their children. So he might not be able to articulate what it is, but something is off, and he doesn't want his children to be around this man, and not to take it as, oh, he's just jealous because I'm no longer with him, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, 100%. Not everything is about you.
Yeah.
I say that to people all the time. Not everything
Yeah.
is about you.
I want us to go to solutions, but before that, because I don't want parents to think, oh God, you're just beating up on us and all of that. We get kind of sprinkled some solutions. We marry before you carry, have vetting from extended families and so on. But before we go to that, I just want to quickly talk about, because we're both Christians and there might be Christians who are listening to this podcast. And one of the things that really struck me was when you said how you lost the ability to hear God's voice when you were a child. And I also experienced that. And now it's difficult to kind of retrain yourself to hear God's voice and how you felt like God was not around you. Some people listening might also have gone through similar things and might be struggling with that kind of spiritual element. Yes, I was in a single parent household. Unfortunately, I might have been molested by one of the people coming in the household. How God didn't love me. Where was God? Why didn't he protect me? You had some of those similar questions. So for persons who might have had similar experience, what do you say to them regarding their relationship with God and whether or not God was even around if they're questioning that?
So it's a big philosophical thing. If God exists, why does he let bad things happen? And the most obvious answer is that human beings have free will. And the reason why human beings have free will, because I think people say human beings have free will, hence bad things can happen. They just kind of leave it there. There's a reason why. The reason why human beings have free will is because you cannot love anyone without the ability to freely want to love someone. It is a voluntary act. So you need an environment that is free to choose to love. In the same way, you're free to love God or not love God. It is your decision to love God or not to love God. So that is why it's a consequential situation where you're free to abide by God's law or not abide by God's law. You're free to choose hell or to choose heaven, right? So a lot of people say God doesn't judge you to heaven or hell. You choose your destination. You're the one who is ultimately making the choice, and he is respecting you. Hell is the place that is absent of God. You lived your entire life absent of God. You're now dead. So you're going to the place that you chose that you wanted. You didn't want to be near God. So this is not a punishment. It is a acknowledgement of your living request based off of your behavior. So these are more philosophical, maybe theological takes on it. But as a kid, I had these kind of similar things where at one point in time, I felt like God was there. And then moving around a lot and being absent from my father and just going to the mental hospital, all these different things happen. God was not in the forefront of my mind, but for many years, aesthetically, I would tell people if they asked me that I was a Christian. but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't have a relationship with God. I didn't understand these aspects. And the way I equate it is it's easy to kind of have doubt over your heavenly father loving you if your own father doesn't love you, your earthly father doesn't love you. And that's kind of how I felt. Am I even deserving of love? And then it goes to the questions that kind of validates your suspicion of, well, I've suffered. Why did God let me suffer? And the truth is that God isn't some genie, right? And he has to keep an environment where you're free to choose. But in the same way, us having this podcast is what I would call influence. We call them influencers, right? And so you can have influence on someone's life, but that person is still making a choice to either listen to what you're saying or say, nah, they're full of it. I'm going to keep doing the thing that I'm doing. And so what I realized is that God had influence on my life in many small ways, putting people into my life at the right moment, at the right time. We were talking about before when I was in Berlin. And in hindsight, I can see what God was doing because in my head, I was saying, I'm not going to do this thing. And in a perfect environment that was set up where someone is waiting for me to bring me to the thing, because God knew how I would interpret that. That would be the beginning of me changing my anxiety, my depression, all these different things, my to strengthen my belief in myself. That was the beginning point. And I detail within the book supernatural experiences that I had. It's a little bit long, so I won't get too much into it, but all these things started happening within, I would say, a year. And Christians hear the term, a battle for your soul, right? So after that event, that's when I had an evil event, a demonic, it's like a spiritually demonic event. And then some months later, a relative died. And then that's when, in hindsight, I know what that is, but that's when I experienced a heavenly experience. So I had all these different things happen within about a year span to wake me up and say that there's something here. Because for a while, I pretended I was a Christian, but I wasn't sure. Then I said, okay, I'm agnostic. I'm just unsure. I'm at least acknowledging that I'm not sure. Um, and even when I say I'm a Christian, um, I say that because that's what people understand, but I'm a lover of Jesus Christ. That's what I am. So what denomination are you? I love Christ. That's who I love. Christ saved me. And I started seeing all the different ways in the midst of going through all these negative things. I remember that improbable scenario where God helped me, where God influenced someone to get close to me. And now I see it as that scenario where at the right time, I was put in front of someone who was going through something. We were talking about single mothers, and I did a podcast last night. Someone that I know, we are on the topic of single mothers, and she divorced her husband many years ago because he was abusive. And she carried that burden on her, that weight, that regret, not regret, but that like feeling like she's less than because she's a single mother now. And so us talking about it, and it provided an opportunity for her to like open up and talk about it because sometimes she would read online comments and she would personalize it and it hurt her. And so I told her that the reason it hurts is because you never resolved it. You're carrying a weight that you don't need to carry. And she's a Christian. And I say, you talk about forgiving other people, you need to forgive yourself. I could tell that meant a lot to her because she kept saying, are you going to make me cry? Because that moment, I needed to be in front of her to deliver that message to her. So God has blessed me by putting people in my life to bring me closer to God, to get me baptized, not only to get baptized, but to meet someone who would baptize me in a different city from where I live because that's where my family's at. And so they are all there. My wife was there and everything. So I can get baptized in front of them and make a promise to God that I've stuck to ever since. And with that, I am seeing not long after I'm writing the book, and then I'm being put in front of people to help heal what they're going through. So God, as people say, God is using to help heal people as well. So I don't even know.
Yeah, and he never He's never leaving our side. He's always with
Amen.
us. So even though the enemy might be there creating these scenarios or experiences that you're going through, that is to really capture your soul, because there's always, on the spiritual level, there's a battle for our souls, right? When we're wrestling against principalities and powers, right? It's not
Yeah.
necessarily a physical thing. So even though there is this battle for our souls, it's to remember that Jesus Christ is always with us. It's
Yeah.
just that we're so overwhelmed by the negative emotions and experiences that we can't see it. But in retrospect, sometimes when we reflect, we can see that things could have been really bad, worse than they were, but God was there with me. And one of the reasons I wanted us to talk about the spirituality too, scientific studies have shown that when fathers are spiritual, whether it's Christian or otherwise, the children will be, and more than the mother. And when there's a divorce, the children lose their belief in spirituality, whatever that is, if it's Christianity or so on. So it's again to show the fathers and also mothers listening the power of having the presence of the fathers there. You want your child to really have a spiritual life, they still can, but it's more likely to happen when the father is there and he also is living that spiritual life. To close, I want us to talk about some of the solutions that maybe we haven't mentioned already. This
Yeah.
is not to beat upon single parent households, it's to really make you aware of what can happen and what we can do to resolve it.
So I think a big solution, and I have solution chapters in the book, but a big solution, which I've seen in practice, is grace and forgiveness for your parents. If you're a kid like myself who was abandoned, if my father were alive and he were to try to reach out to me, I would accept that call. And I would try to see if if he's sincere, but if he's sincere, to try to build that relationship that we didn't have before, right? It's a different relationship when you're a kid wanting something from your father, but I'm a grown man. If you used to call me today, I would accept that call to build a different type of relationship with him. Not to excuse what he did, but if he's being a human being and acknowledging his mistakes, I'm willing to move forward with that. Acknowledge, not excuse, right? But I want to understand because I think a lot of kids want to understand, why didn't you do that? Because kids typically internalize, you didn't do it because of me. And what I have to tell people is your parents didn't do because of them, and don't carry the weight of your parents' failures because that is not your fault as a child. And children have a hard time understanding that. They don't get it resolved and they become adults who still carry that. Something's wrong with me, that it's like this edge that stays with them. So my thing is, I actually over the years I've become more empathetic to the parent who made a mistake, and they want to. They're not looking for give forgive. They're genuinely looking for a relationship, and they're trying to get to that point where there's a relationship. I've talked to a father who had a divorce, and this is purely from his perspective. The mother made up stuff about him, turned the kids against him and stuff like that. And now the kids don't really want to talk to him, even though he's trying to reach out. And what I had to tell him was, your kids want you to hurt like they're hurting. And if you give up, you validate, see, he didn't care. So if they're putting you through it, suffer through it, but keep reaching out to them because that will slowly tear down the wall. The other thing is you have to stop saying, no, 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 you have to hear my side. When they're telling you, I feel this way. No, 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 you have it wrong. No, acknowledge how they feel. Because when you do that, even if they are wrong, you're disregarding their feelings. So you can be right. And that's not important at this point. What's important is how they feel. And they need to resolve that. But in order for them to resolve that, you actually have to hear them out. So if you're in that situation where you're trying to build up a relationship with kids who are kind of shunning you or not answering your calls, things of that nature, you need to be incredibly sincere, but you also need to suffer through it. Because there are many cases where they're like, see, I called them. They say, I don't want to talk to you. So I'm just not going to talk to them. Like, no, keep calling them. They're testing you. My dad is still calling me. I told him I don't want to call him. I don't want to talk to him. Wear him down. Wear them down with love. Tell them, I want to hear your side to things. I apologize. I am sorry for what I did wrong. Not don't make this about the mother. She didn't do X, Y, and Z, and she made up these lies because that's for you. That's not for them. For them, they want you to acknowledge their pain. In the meantime, they want you to experience the same type of pain that they experienced. And the last thing I would say is, as I said before, I feel incredibly blessed when people open up to me with their stories and ask me for my 2 cents. I recently went to a conference at Moms for Liberty. I spoke on a father's panel at Moms for Liberty, and this young man came to me, talked to me. He's 18, and he opened up and said, "My father wasn't there for me throughout my childhood, but lately he's been reaching out and he wants to build a relationship." And I'm a little bit hesitant. I hung out with him once. It was a little bit weird and I don't know if I should move forward. And I told him, it's because you're afraid of being hurt, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, in order to love anyone, you have to risk being hurt. Can't love anyone without the risk of being hurt. So you have to go into this knowing that your father may hurt you, but it's worth it to potentially have your father. And you'll be okay. If a year from now he messes up and he hurts you, then it was still worth it. And you'll be fine.
Mhm.
And so Um, I gave him a copy of my book and I told him, let me know how things go. And actually, the next day, he sent me a message and he told me, I spoke to my father. I told him that I want to try, and he was very happy. And his father sounds like to me, based on what he said, his father doesn't seem like a crazy person. There's some sort of story as to why he wasn't there. I don't know what it is. It doesn't sound like he knows fully either. But his father was the one who reached out to him, which is a really positive thing
Mhm.
for me. It's not him seeking for his father to be in his life, like it was in my circumstance. So to be there at that right moment, once again, God placed me in certain places at certain times for
Mhm.
people to hear what I have to say so they can have access to me and ask me because he's on the fence about something. And for me to be able to tell him, it's okay that you feel this way. Go forward. You'll be fine even if he disappoints you. You'll still be okay. But your father's failures is not because of you, it's because of your father. So don't carry that burden. I pray that they're able to build a relationship all because one day I decided to sit down and write a book.
I was also thinking too, for mothers, you might have had a messy divorce, you probably weren't married and you had a messy breakup, and you're dealing with your own emotions regarding that ex-partner and you happen to have a child with them. I really want you to reflect on this conversation that we had together and realize there's so many detrimental effects of your children not having their father in their lives. Now, if you reach out and he doesn't reciprocate, that's one thing. But try not to alienate the other parent because
Mhm,
of what they did to you or your emotions regarding that parent. They can still have a good relationship with your children, even though they're no longer with you. I think it's too risky to not have the parent or the parents in their children's lives when there's no issue regarding abuse and safety and all of that. And for those who are listening who do not have children yet, just listen to us. It's not old fashioned. You need to vet your partner, and it's better to be married before you have children, even though it's not a foolproof thing, but it goes a long way. Because if a man is not really interested in you, he's definitely not going to marry you. He might string you along for 3, 4 years, but he will not marry you. You try the utmost best to have your children within marriage because the data is out there. It doesn't matter the culture or the country. When children are raised in a healthy nuclear family, they are light years ahead of everybody socio-emotionally, financially, academically, you name it, they are ahead. And I think too, If you are thinking of breaking up with your partner because you're no longer happy, again, it's not a safety issue. It's to really think about what's beneficial for your child or your children. And you might think, but should I just sit in an unhappy marriage? No, we're not saying to sit in an unhappy marriage. As my wonderful sister-in-law, my sister have said to me lots of times, you know the solution, you just don't want the pain of working through that solution. So you don't have to live in an unhappy marriage, but there might be things that need to be done that you have to put the work in. And you might say, but the other person is not doing it. But it takes one person to make the shift. It takes two people to divorce, right? So that's what is coming out for me as well, that get married before you have children. Work through your marriage if there's no safety issue. And those who are no longer together really aim. And the extended families, you know, you have a niece and nephew out there. Invite them to church. Invite them over. You have a nephew. Invite him to get his hair cut when you're taking your son to get his hair cut. Children need the extended family as well. So you don't want them to just lose a parent and lose an extended family. It really takes a village. Thank you so much for this conversation. And I do hope that parents listen to what was shared. And we would love to hear from you, your comments, your feedback. Were you in a similar situation as a child? How did you resolve it? Were you thinking of breaking up with your children's other parents? And have this conversation cause you to reconsider? And so on. So thank you so much. And before you go, can you tell people where they can find you on social media if they want to follow your work and to reach out to you as well?
Yeah, my Substack, adambcoleman.substack.com. I put, if I'm writing articles of different publications, if I videos, interviews, especially on television, I put everything up on there. I'm accessible. People can go to wrongspeak.net. They can find the email, or the email's promotions at wrongspeak.net if someone really wants to email me and ask me a question. And I'm most active on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call
Mm.
it,
Yeah.
at wrong_speak. And I do have a YouTube channel where I'm starting to do like short documentaries, as well as some political commentary. I have a short documentary about traveling with my wife, but it's a travel love story because there's not enough positive love stories that are out there. Everything is negative, everything's terrible, no one gets along, men and women are bad, and stuff like that. So I wanted to show I love my wife very much, and we are friends, and we do this thing where we travel together. And traveling has brought it. It's like a reset for us every year for our anniversary, and then people get to see where we traveled to last year. So yeah, it's a short documentary style type of video, but I think it's very pleasant and hopeful.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us and being part of our growing Family Dialogues family. And we wish you all the best in all your endeavors with working with other families as well, as we aim to keep the nuclear family together because the future is the nuclear family.